and she will want to make sure Trump knows it. As Eli Ratner, who served as the U.S. Assistant Secretary of Defense for Indo-Pacific Affairs until last year, pointed out in the FT, the U.S. has made this mistake before. The pattern is consistent. When Washington backs off, Beijing doesn't reciprocate. It consolidates its gains. When the Obama administration declined to challenge China's island building in the South China Sea, artificial reefs became military installations. When Trump paused tariffs in his first term in exchange for the Phase 1 trade deal, China missed its purchase commitments, and the structural reforms were deferred to a Phase 2 that never came. Ratner argues that the time being bought isn't being used to strengthen America's position, particularly given that the war in Iran has drained military readiness for any potential crisis in the Pacific. And all of this will happen while the much larger geopolitical issue, the future of Taiwan, hovers in the background. A senior Taiwanese official told Bloomberg last month that what they fear most is being put on the menu at a Trump-Xi summit. China would very much like rhetorical concessions on Taiwan in exchange for those beans and Boeings. Whether they get them is another question. The answer consistently was nothing. Harding came away with the understanding that there is nothing China believes it cannot make better and cheaper domestically, and nothing for which it wants to rely on foreigners for a single day longer than it has to. A few of the economists he spoke to, who had perhaps pondered the issue already, jumped ahead to a different point altogether. Their answer to the question of what China would like to buy from the rest of the world was, you should let Chinese companies set up factories in Europe, which is not really an answer to the question, but it does tell you quite a lot about how they see the problem. Now, to a certain type of politician, this might sound like a triumph of national strength, the threat to bring it back. Both sides are really just trying to buy time. The US wants breathing room to build domestic rare earth processing capacity because China currently controls those supply chains and used them as devastating leverage during the tariff war. China wants time to develop its semiconductor industry and reduce its dependence on Western technology. And Xi has his own grievances to raise too. China imports roughly 40% of its oil through the Strait of Hormuz. So the American military situation in the Middle East is not just a US political problem, it's costing China money, and Xi will want to make sure Trump knows it. As Eli Ratner, who served as the U.S. Assistant Secretary of Defense for Now, the Board of Trade will sit alongside the already existing Board of Peace, which was established earlier this year to promote peace building, which Trump will chair for life. So we now have a Board of Peace and a Board of Trade, and all we really need next is a Board of Good Intentions, and we'll have the complete set. There's also the small matter that Trump arrives in Beijing having largely been disarmed by his own courts. In February, the Supreme Court struck down his IEEPA tariffs, the ones he had been raising and lowering on a near-daily basis last year. He immediately pivoted to a different legal authority, Section 122 of the Trade Act, which allows temporary tariffs to address balance of payments crises. Last week, a federal trade court ruled those ones illegal too, on the grounds that the US is not actually experiencing the kind of balance of payments crisis the law was designed for. The administration is appealing, but the tariffs expire in July regardless. A third set of tariffs under Section 301 is being prepared, but those investigations won't be complete until the summer. So the US president is sitting across from Xi Jinping at a negotiating table, and his most prominent negotiating tool has been taken away from him by his own judiciary twice. His domestic position isn't helping either, manufacturing. That leaves the United States. The US has the deepest, most liquid, and historically best governed financial markets in the world. When surplus countries like China and Germany suppress domestic consumption and generate excess savings, those savings have to go somewhere. And roughly half of the world's excess savings end up in American financial markets, not because Americans invited them, but because there's nowhere else for that volume of capital to go. Now, here's where the accounting gets important. When foreign capital flows into the United States, the US must, by definition, run a corresponding trade deficit. This is not a choice, it's a balance of payments identity. The foreign money is being used to buy bonds and financial assets, not goods. The US becomes the consumer of last resort for the global economy, not because it wants to, but because the accounting leaves no alternative. As Pettis puts it, the US doesn't fund its trade deficit, surplus countries force it to run one. Now, so this is the backdrop. Two economies under strain, a temporary truce that expires in a few months, and a summit that will be mostly remembered for the photographs. But the thing that almost nobody on the news will explain, because it requires about 10 minutes of patience and some basic accounting, is that the problem these two leaders are trying to solve is not really a political problem at all. It's an accounting problem, and the reason it never gets fixed is not that politicians are unwilling to fix it, it's that most of them don't appear to understand what's actually causing it. And that's what this video is about. So the two leaders will shake hands, make announcements, and fly home. The photographs will look very serious, but the underlying problem, the one we've spent this entire video explaining, will not have changed. Trade imbalances are not caused by a lack of summits. They're caused by domestic policy choices that neither side appears willing to change. China will continue to suppress household consumption. The US will continue to absorb the resulting surplus, and the accounting will continue to do what accounting does, regardless of what anyone announces at a podium in Beijing. A factory with no customers has a much bigger problem. This brings us back to the handshakes in Beijing this week. Expectations for this summit are, to put it generously, modest. Both sides appear to be looking for just enough progress to justify the photographs. The US wants China to commit to buying those Beans and Boeings. To oversee these purchases, the two sides are expected to announce a board of trade, a committee of senior officials from both countries whose job will be to make sure that China actually follows through this time. This is necessary because China made similar purchase commitments in the Phase 1 trade deal in 2020 and then didn't follow through. So the solution to China not honoring its commitments is a new committee to monitor whether China honors its commitments. I'm sure that this time it'll be different. Now, the Board of Trade will sit alongside the already existing Board of Peace, which was